Welcome to the show today. We have a very special guest, Mr. Devin Alvarez. Devin, why don't you say hello to our listeners for us?
Howdy.
A little backstory on Devin. He has been an environmental scientist in the cannabis industry for 3 years now. He has worked at one of the most cutting-edge analytical laboratories in the industry to date and has even built a hemp farm from the ground up. Currently, he is the lead microbiologist and environmental scientist consultant for the Full Melt Fusion firm. We have a little Q&A today to give our listeners a little insight into the cannabis industry from an expert environmental scientist perspective. Without further ado, let's jump directly into the Q&A. So, Devin, what got you into environmental science?
Well, Captain Planet and cannabis.
Nice. Very nice.
Specifically, I was doing some underground work with the plant years ago, and it was humid, and we had an outbreak of a powdery mildew, and so that got me to poking around the environmental science department at one of the nearby universities, and then there it was actually the Defense Department who got me on board with the environmental science program. They were interested in building these algae-powered wastewater recycling and biofuel production systems.
Nice.
So we got into an applied project there for a couple of years.
Nice. When would you say you got first exposed to cannabis?
During my tenure at the U.S. Air Force Academy.
Nice.
In Colorado Springs.
Very nice.
We would after the first year when we were allowed to leave, we would go up to Boulder pretty frequently. And that's probably where we got some of our first exposure.
Very nice. What was your crossover from cannabis and hemp-like, from the environmental science realm to more of a cutting-edge science?
So, it was the environmental science work that brought us back up to Colorado. And during a presentation in 2012, we had the opportunity to get lit up by a cop at the park, meaning like he struck a lighter and lit a joint. And we had a long conversation about the laws changing, and so I was just instantly catalyzed to make the crossover and bring my skills up the mountain. It was a startup culture, which wasn't totally unlike new project development in the tech space like we were doing previously, but the metrics for success were a little different, and the business environment was unforgiving.
It's a little more survival of the fittest, isn't it?
Yeah, it was very dark. It became Darwinistic. Yeah.
Well, I guess that leads me up to my next question, which would be, why don't you explain for us your journey that led you up to this point, to what you're doing right now, and what was really like the main things that kind of kept you on the course to where you're at right now?
Well, I grew up in a military background with a background of service and commitment to the country, and that played out in my own life, in my appointments to West Point and USAFA, and when I took the oath to the Constitution, it really reverberated with me, and during my course in strategic planning and national asset control and the like, we started really thinking about what would be best for the population. And that's about the same time I started running into these sacred plants for the first time, while I was having these other thoughts about national strategy. And it seemed to me, that what we may have on our hands with the rise in opiate epidemics and other substance abuse issues in the country is something similar to what we had studied in military war school, which was something called the Boxer Rebellion, where the British selling opium to the Chinese, and the Chinese were not all about it, except a lot of them were really about it, but the government wasn't into it. So they went to war with Britain over this fact. Now, Britain kicked their ass and kept selling them opium, and then also acquired Hong Kong. And this was a strategy that they were, deploying to gain control over the population, to influence it, to make it weaker. And, when I started looking out at what was going on in my tribe here in the U.S. and what I had experienced, in Florida, which, at the time was a pill mill capital of the world, this is what I saw playing out. And discovering the sacred plants and hearing their message and experiencing what's going on there turned my mind's eye and my focus, towards this. And that's how I started this journey with Ernest, over a decade ago. Not quite sure how we would get here. And then it was almost through a series of, divine interventions, if you will.
Cause and effect action, huh?
Yeah, cause and effect, truly. And now we're here in a position to be able to help with the rollout of this plant,
nationwide.
Everywhere.
Worldwide, right?
Globally. Yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, I guess let's start moving into some of the cannabis questions. It was nice hearing a little bit of backstory and what got you into this industry and kept you interested in it. So let's hear a little bit about your experience in the Colorado cannabis industry. What has it been like coming from Florida over here and then experiencing the regulation and what has it been like for you?
Oh man, it was really, in some ways, it was a breath of fresh air, because when you're, operating in these gray markets and these black markets, there is no framework for good medicine to be produced. And, while the system in Colorado was far from perfect, it was a really great first cut at making this a real deal program that we could be really proud of and know that we were bringing good medicine to the people. So,
absolutely. Let me ask you, what has been your biggest struggle being a cannabis environmental scientist? What's your biggest struggle in that field of expertise?
Well, I mean, from a site perspective, I'd say working conditions. A lot of the early facilities I was seeing, it's not all of them. There are definitely good operators out there doing it the right way. But there's also a lot of, less than optimal situations, where the working conditions aren't really great for the employees. You got a lot of high particulate matter in the air. You have unkept, kind of dirtiness. Walls clearly aren't being cleaned regularly. So, the industrial hygiene could be improved. And then, just the whole growing in that big closet kind of concept in these warehouses that are closed off and not having access to the sun, not doing it in a greenhouse, which, in any other commercial space, that's how we would do it. But given these particular circumstances and the high value of real estate, that's how everyone ended up starting off. And, it's changing some, and it's not changing for everybody. The ones who, are making that change or are capable of leveraging the greenhouse really get to avert a lot of these, these environmental issues that come with growing in a closet. So, being on the ground floor with these operations and helping navigate that space, I would say, was probably the biggest challenge from an environmental science perspective, because, you needed proper HVAC. You needed to be able to react to rapidly swinging temperatures. You needed to be able to get enough circulation, because if not, people were seeing all these pests and pathogens pop up, and that's exactly what was happening. And so just managing these outbreaks and moving the industry away from that while trying to keep them, from using pesticides that could possibly be very harmful to people, is a big nut to crack.
Totally, and also the time that you apply the pesticide. A lot of people in the beginning didn't really understand that spraying the pesticides on the budding plant when it has its glandular structures at its most optimal peak for photosynthesis. I mean, you're spraying pesticides on there, and those oils and those synthetic chemicals are binding to those trichomes. And then when you do an extraction and make a concentrated form of it, you end up actually having concentrated forms of those poisons as well. I totally agree with you. What are your thoughts on the analytical control regulations in Colorado and in the cannabis industry here? Analytics, basically like the residual solvents, potency, contaminants, pesticide residue. This kind of bounces us into this topic now.
I'd say it's a mixed bag. I'd say they definitely have all the bases covered, and we're dialing it in. It wasn't adoption wasn't at the speed that I would have wanted for all the sectors, but they're all coming, and the noose is tightening on bad operators and ultimately improving the quality of the medicine out there for everybody. So I'm happy. I mean, it's only been a year, two we're in, and we're already starting to see the pesticide regulations come on board, which was a big shakeup for a lot of operators.
A lot of operators not operating right?
Correct. Yeah. needed to get it dialed in, and in some cases they don't go far enough. Some of the residual solvent guidelines
could tighten up a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
If you could see one piece of legislation in the cannabis and hemp space, analytics, either added or to be changed that's already currently there, what would that be?
I would want to see some kind of standardization across state lines, some kind of national board, some kind of. Mm-hmm.
Nice, some kind of regulating body that kind of standardizes it across the entire country.
Yeah, and I mean, or let's just take it, local real quick, and even in the state, getting a bill out there that would earmark some money for the establishment of a self-regulating organization between the lab groups.
Absolutely. I like that, Devin. What are your thoughts on the regulation of hemp, and where do you see the future of that going?
Well, that's a touchy subject, because if you talk to some people, all marijuana is hemp, that's all cannabis, it's all the same thing, and if you talk to others, there's clear distinctions, and as you probably well know, even the feds don't have a clear direction. The DEA thinks one thing, U.S. Farm Bill reads another, so there's a lot of conflict right now in the hemp regulatory space, which, to companies that are willing to accept that maybe a slightly larger risk profile, these conditions could probably be very favorable to them. It'll definitely, the existing headstrong currents, headwinds are definitely going to push and are pushing and have pushed some folks out of the space. But, the existing hemp regulations in Colorado allowed 200 farmers to get registered, and the vast majority of them grew crops that were under the THC limit of 0.3%, which, is how Colorado separates marijuana and hemp. And most other states have adopted that methodology, and that seems to kind of be the going way. And, when talking about hemp, it can kind of be a word salad because it's really important to, use the words hemp, not cannabis, and not marijuana, and describe the products, correctly, as to not invite any...
Like a negative connotation?
Yeah, you want to frame it correctly. You really want to be careful to frame it as what it is. So misperceptions can't be misperceived.
Absolutely.
And I want to see some stronger regulation come out that protects the hemp industry and protects its, primary source of revenue right now, which is the CBD. and other cannabinoid-like products, because the efficacy on safety seems to be pretty high from what the research out there is saying, and the fact that it's non-psychoactive. Right now there are some industry groups, some larger players that are gearing up to go to war over file a lawsuit in court over the DEA ruling that was made in the last month or two about reiterating CBD's scheduled status.
Totally.
And then you have this U.S. Farm Bill, which offers protections at the state level, and you have the legal framework that the state in Colorado has put together. So I think as long as we're operating inside the state's rules, we're going to be able to. Anybody operating in the hemp space will still steer far clear of trouble. And in any light, the DEA's toying around with the regulations probably did the industry more good than anything, because it was PR that we needed.
Totally.
Because the public's not really standing for this sort of phooey anymore.
I completely agree with you on that, and we're not going to stand for it any further. Let's just say. Let's bring it back to the garden and the environmental aspects of it. What is the most common environmental issues and pathogens that infest a commercial garden, and which are the hardest to remove or control?
Well, really, those pests and pathogens are a result of varying humidity levels that are suboptimal. So things like your powdery mildews, your gray molds, your botrytis cinereas, then the mites. They can be equally destructive, and they love to come in when it's low humidity. So it's like if you get outside that gap, that humidity band and that temperature band, you can pick up some pretty nasty critters on either end.
Agreed.
And
well, let me ask you a question. In Florida, with the recent changes of regulation and them allowing the growth of cannabis, indoor cultivation, the humidity levels in Florida, what do you think that's going to be in regards to consistency of crop yield and crop harvesting, and the issues that growers are going to run into in like a more humid environment like Florida when producing consistent harvests?
Well, that's a great question, Frank, and that really gets to the nut of it, because it depends on the bioregion. And definitely here in Florida, the humidity levels are high. The gray molds, the molds and mildews are going to be a major problem. And how we combat it is going to hopefully they don't fold in the state and just sloppily adopt the use of different fungicides that could otherwise be harmful if smoked. And that's going to require a strong boots on the ground effort. And there is stuff out there, some of it's experimental, especially when we start thinking about the microbiome and how we might use that to an advantage. So there definitely are solutions, and it comes down first to good system, good facility design, making sure you're picking the right contractors to not only, provide you with the materials, but to put it together. You get what you pay for in a lot of respects. And then, a really strong monitoring plan and a strong integrated pest management program, are going to be absolutely necessary to manage the risk profile associated with those mold and mildew threats.
I agree. Well, I guess to nail it in the last segment of this issue, let's say what would be the biggest indoor environmental struggle that you have encountered? Not necessarily in a grow or a cultivation facility, but more so just in a production or manufacturing aspect along with the grow. Maybe it happened in the grow, maybe it happened elsewhere, maybe in an extraction lab. What would be the biggest indoor environmental struggle that you've encountered?
Oh gosh, on a sheer scale, manage a fungal outbreak and a root aphid outbreak in a facility that, cut 1,000 plants a day.
Oof.
So, and it was all open. So it was like, if something happened in that, it wasn't cordoned off. There was no, you couldn't shut down a bay and quarantine a space. It was like trying to put out a wildfire in a hay barn,
Totally.
So that was probably the biggest at scale.
Well, what would you say your biggest environmental struggle has been dealing in the outdoor environment, whether it be cultivation or just facility management? Like a hybrid greenhouse or just an outdoor grow in itself?
Yeah, well, putting that hemp farm into the desert, that high desert this summer was a challenge, operationally speaking, because it was remote. And the pH was very high in the ground. And so, we looked at a lot of different strategies to bring the pH down, but, they just weren't really acceptable. So we ended up having to bring a lot of soil in. So logistically speaking, it was tough, So all of a sudden the environmentals made, we had plenty of sunshine. We weren't too worried about, humidity. It was a desert, so water was huge. That and the short growing cycles. So
absolutely.
Down here in Florida, we're going to need a variety that's going to, be resistant to those funguses and handle drenches well.
Well, excellent. I'm going to touch on I have a GMO question for you a little bit later on because I would like you to elaborate a little further in regards to sculpting the genetics to the environment for greater consistent success. But I would like to ask you about the accuracy of the cannabis and hemp analytical labs. What are your thoughts on the accuracy of the current labs handling all the analytical testing right now in Colorado?
Well, there's definitely a handful of really good ones, and then there's a lot of them that aren't doing it right. Everyone's been checked out by the state, but in some spaces the state doesn't always have the best practices.
Excellent.
You want to look at a lab and evaluate the psychology, the thinking behind how they put their lab together, and if they're seeing how all the pieces affect each other. So you want somebody who's really going to break it down at the facility level and all the way down to the instrument. But you also are going to want a practical lab. It's a group that understands costs, understands the level of precision needed, and can be consistent.
Absolutely.
When the program first came together, you definitely had a lot of reports of inconsistency across groups. And that was definitely true. You had all kinds of different methods. You had people using, instrumentation inside facilities that weren't validated. And by validated, I mean like all the things that are relevant, the environmentals like humidity and temperature are, dialed into a specific range and they don't fluctuate from that range, so that it's pretty much the same. And that's what it should be like, but you have a lot of folks not doing it like that, and you had a lot of folks not doing it like that in the beginning for sure. And, if kind of extrapolate sloppiness with facility validation, to all the other aspects of what it takes to run a lab, and, you can wind up with a lot of drift over time, just like departing from the shore, a few degrees in the beginning and you'll be in England, and a few the other way you'll be in Africa. And so, you had a lot of folks not thinking like that because they were thinking agricultural, and it's a plant, and that makes sense. And in some cases that is the way we, should approach what's going on. But when you're talking about human consumption, the interface there and the drugs component to this, you really want to be as precise as possible, even if for nothing else, but to ensure best practice so that we carry that energy forward in all the aspects of the business.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I know personally when I was doing production full-time for creating products and edibles. I know that I've personally have sent in 10 samples of the same product to the same lab just to see if the results are going to correspond, if there's going to be a large variance in it. And they didn't know that it was the same product because I labeled it and keyed it off differently. But I was able to see in the test results, and I was actually able to run regression analysis on the results, and I'm actually able to almost test the lab who are testing the product that we're submitting. And you're right, some of them were so far off, it was like it was hit or miss, and the hit or miss, it really dictates if the batch is sellable or not. And you really need that consistency, like you said, I mean, to get the products off the ground, or else, that's a lot of money wasted if the lab is not doing their processes right. So let's discuss the biggest threat to the cannabis and hemp industry right now. What is affecting the cannabis and hemp industry right now from an environmental perspective? What would you say would be the largest threat to it?
Taking the time to run a good operation and do the due diligence and the proper execution on the things we were discussing, the facility build, the management program, the IPM, so that you're not running and you're not trying to put out fires. We just don't ever want the fire to start, and that starts by staying on top of things, and that requires the organization to show up with presence every day and commitment to carrying out, the diligent efforts necessary to look for these things, and like I said, not be putting fires out so that we're not struggling to keep the problem in check, but that we're kind of always keeping it under check. It's better to be fit and not sick.
Absolutely.
And so we want to keep the cultivations in good fitness. And sometimes when things aren't right in front of our faces on fire, we have a tendency to kind of just brush them under the rug like nothing. There's nothing to do. But in a large facility, I guarantee you, there's always something to do. Those plants need attention. They have an energy of their own.
Absolutely. Well, Devin, what do you enjoy most about science?
Discovery. The ability to provide, firm answers in what could otherwise be a sea of possibility.
Absolutely. What would you say you like least about being a scientist?
Well, sometimes you run into these issues with I call pathological science, which is, take for instance how we view food in the country, calorie in versus calorie out, which is a very thermodynamic concept, versus the reality, which is a biological concept. So it's based on hormones and stuff, not calorie content, and on the overall effect in the system and the outcome. And so, what I mean by this is like you run into science and its own dogma, and its own dogma sometimes will prevent it from moving forward and advancing space. And kind of you run into folks in science who sometimes think if it's not proven or yet it doesn't exist or it can't. And so sometimes science has a way of crushing the imagination as much as it can to lift it up.
Agreed. What are your thoughts on the future of cannabis and GMOs?
Definitely going to happen. Definitely going to be a good thing. I'm not necessarily for the business practices of Monsanto, and that's totally up for another discussion some other time. But fundamentally speaking, GMOs, actually going in and changing whether it's going in and changing the genome or it's influencing it through natural selection or some combined process. I mean, it's a part of our work as humans on the planet to do this, to change things and to tinker, and it could have, and it will have massive benefits for society if executed properly. If you consider that, biomass accumulation rates, when you're growing hemp in a field, you grow a lot of it, it grows quickly. And I mean, pound for pound, you suck up more carbon out of the sky with hemp in an acre in a year than you do with, most of the tree varietals that we plant. And so whether it's growing, pulp fiber for batteries or clothes or, seed for cattle feed or human feed or, the essential oils, the omega-3s, the cannabinoid medicines. I mean, there's a lot of people on this planet. We'll be 10 billion here by 2050, and that's a lot of people to take care of. The plant is good for the ground, and if we can work with it so that it will produce, even more for us, I know it'll empower us to be even better stewards of the planet and start tackling larger environmental issues in the globe.
I agree, and I hope every single one of those persons have access to cannabis and hemp as well. What do you see the future of the hemp and cannabis industry in Colorado specifically evolving into from here on out?
Well, it's a big incubator. So it's been putting out, models of regulation, models of behavior, allowing organizations to form and iterate and improve, and best practices to be established. So there's a lot of, whether it's actually patented IP or business process or just experience coming out of that state that we can put to good use everywhere that this plan is going.
I guess that leads me up to my next question is, what do you think about nationally? Where do you think hemp and cannabis are going nationally?
Well, Texas is going to be a big player in the next coming years with hemp as some of their legislation goes through. They're going to vote on it soon, especially once they see the dollars rolling in California and Florida. They're going to want to cash in. And, couple that with, very well-known politicians of strong religious backgrounds going around telling their constituency and generally promoting the idea that this is God's plant, are also, turning the tide down there. And so Texas is going to shock the world when it goes, but it'll happen. Florida's going to be a big state. It's going to be a sleeper state. But the state is committed to exceeding Colorado's sales. They're competitive. And they got a big population here, and there's a lot of people that need it.
A lot of real estate in Texas. We can grow a lot of hemp and cannabis plants there, that's for sure.
Yeah, you can. I mean, Colorado's not going to be a biomass state, It's just not the right place to produce a lot of biomass. Look around. Yeah. But it's an awesome place to produce seed. It's an awesome place to produce, cannabinoids because it's dry and, you don't have to worry about the mold and mildew. It kind of replicates an area where these plants originally came from.
Dry and arid climates.
Yeah, but, Kentucky, Florida, these southern states, the Texas belt, the southeastern United States is going to be a huge hemp producer, which it always was, until the pine and cotton barons got together with all those other nasty folks and kicked it out. So, I think that we're going to see Colorado continue to pump out, amazing talent, great experience, good models, lessons learned to fuel the build-out of the industry everywhere else. And these pine plantations that I'm looking at right now are going to be getting cut down and turned over to hemp before too long.
That doesn't sound like a bad thing to me, right? What do you desire to see happen in the cannabis and hemp movement in your lifetime?
I'd like to see the entire, the entire federal prohibition overturned. I'd like to see, the Defense Department and DARPA and the Department of Energy and other groups fund critical needs research areas for this industry in cooperation with major producers. I'd like to see, people in Singapore not being drug out into the street and shot for trading in plants. I'd like to see the entire deconstruction of the global war on drugs. specifically this plant.
Couldn't agree more. When do you see this coming to fruition? When do you see the legalization effort at least tackling the cannabis plant and hemp spaces in regards to national legalization? When do you see this happening?
It's done federally in the next 5 years.
Absolutely.
Someone's gonna do it, or we're gonna do it ourselves.
Well, what are you currently working on right now? What is your current thing that you're interested in right now that you got going on?
Supporting the build out of this space.
You're in Florida right now, right?
Yeah, in Florida right now.
Nice. Boots on the ground in Florida. What would be the best advice that you can give a new scientist aspiring to enter into the cannabis industry?
Call the grows, call the spaces you're interested in and ask them what their problems are.
And get
Find
involved?
out what's hard.
And get
what
involved?
needs to get solved.
Nice. What do you see yourself and your relationship with cannabis in the year 2017 and beyond?
Well, for the next 2 years, we focused on build-outs, supporting those missions. And year 3, we'll be checking in with the regulatory efforts in earnest, see where we're at. Based on that, the rest will be determined.
Nice. Is there anything else
20 years, I still see myself being with the plant.
Like a lifetime relationship?
Sure, definitely.
Was there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation? Or you'd like to discuss?
Not at this time.
All right, well, I had an amazing time picking your brain today and getting your expert environmental scientist insight into the largest emerging industry in America. To all of our listeners, if you'd like to get a hold of Devin or any of the other cannabis consultants, please visit fullmeltfusion.com. I'll put a link in the description box, and for those of you who found this content interesting and want more, then hit the subscribe button and like this video. Thanks for tuning into the show today. Have a good day.